December 8, 1942, Fujian Province, China, exactly 1 year and 1 day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. A lookout scanning the skies spots an aircraft approaching from the direction of Japanese-occupied Taiwan. Alarms sound. Two American pilots, Flying Tigers legends Robert Lee Scott and Johnny Hampshire, scramble to their P-40 Warhawks and race into the sky to intercept. As they close in, they radio the unknown aircraft. No response. They try again. Still nothing. Flying closer, they realize it's another P-40, an American fighter. But something's wrong. The plane bears insignia that hasn't been used since the attack on Pearl Harbor over a year ago. Is it a captured American aircraft being flown by the Japanese? A trick? Scott fires a warning shot across its wing. The plane doesn't react, doesn't evade, doesn't return fire. Nothing. They pull alongside the mysterious aircraft, and what they see freezes their blood. The P-40 is a wreck. Bullet holes riddle the fuselage. Part of the wing is missing. The canopy is partially shot away. Crude repairs cover sections of the aircraft. Mismatched paint, bare metal patches, obviously makeshift work done without proper tools or materials. And through the damaged canopy, they see the pilot slumped in his seat, motionless, his flight suit dark with blood. Then, impossibly, the pilot raises his head slightly, looks at them, and waves, a weak, final gesture of acknowledgement from one American to another. Moments later, the ghost plane loses altitude, disappears into the clouds, and crashes into a rice paddy below. When troops reach the wreckage, they find something even stranger. The P-40 had no landing gear. The wheel wells were empty. The plane physically couldn't have taken off from any runway. For over 80 years, the story of the ghost P-40 has haunted aviation historians. Who was the pilot? Where had he come from? How did a plane with no landing gear fly over 1,000 miles of enemy territory? And why did he appear exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor? Today, we're diving deep into one of World War II's most mysterious and tragic tales. To understand the ghost P-40, we need to go back to December 1941 and the catastrophic fall of the Philippines. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, they simultaneously launched coordinated strikes across the Pacific. One of their primary targets was the Philippines, where General Douglas MacArthur commanded American and Filipino forces. Despite having hours of warning after Pearl Harbor, American aircraft in the Philippines were caught on the ground and destroyed. Within days, Japan had achieved air superiority. Their ground invasion began immediately. American and Filipino forces fought desperately, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from reinforcements. MacArthur's forces retreated to the Bataan Peninsula and the fortress island of Corregidor in Manila Bay, where they held out for months. But by April 1942, the situation was hopeless. Food ran out, ammunition dwindled, malaria and dysentery ravaged the troops. On April 9, 1942, approximately 76,000 American and Filipino soldiers on Bataan surrendered to the Japanese, the largest surrender in American military history. What followed was the Bataan Death March, where thousands of prisoners died from execution, starvation, and abuse during a forced 65-mile march to prison camps. MacArthur had already evacuated to Australia on President Roosevelt's orders, famously promising, "I shall return." Corregidor fell on May 6, 1942, but not everyone surrendered. Small groups of American soldiers escaped the Japanese advance and fled to the southern Philippine island of Mindanao, which was still partially controlled by Filipino guerrillas and American holdouts. Among those who made it to Mindanao were pilots and aircraft mechanics, men who had worked on P-40 fighters before the bases were overrun. And according to the legend of the ghost P-40, these men performed a miracle. The story, as told by pilot Robert Lee Scott in his book, God is My Co-Pilot, and various accounts over the years, goes like this. On Mindanao in May 1942, a small group of American airmen, led by a pilot named Sherrill, likely a pseudonym, found themselves stranded with 11 mechanics and one wrecked P-40 Warhawk. The P-40E model they had was damaged but had sound wings and 6 working .50 caliber machine guns. About 4 miles away, they located another crashed P-40 with an intact fuselage. The plane weighed over 3 tons empty, but with the help of the local Moro tribesmen, they somehow carried the fuselage to the wings. For 7 months, deep in the jungle, these men worked, and they had no proper tools, no replacement parts, no runway. They were hunted by Japanese patrols. They survived on scraps and the kindness of Filipino civilians. But they had a plan: rebuild the P-40, equip it to fly one suicide mission, and strike back at the Japanese. They cut a 5,000-foot jungle runway by hand. They fashioned bamboo skis to replace the missing landing gear so the plane could take off. They installed an extra 50-gallon fuel tank in the baggage compartment, giving the P-40 just enough range for an extraordinarily long flight. By December 1942, they were ready. On December 8, 1942, exactly 1 year after the Pearl Harbor attack, the pilot they called Corn Sherrill loaded 4 300-pound bombs under the wings, climbed into the cockpit, and prepared for a mission everyone knew was one way. The P-40 roared down the jungle runway on bamboo skis. Witnesses later reported hearing the engine tear through the silence of the morning. The plane lifted into the sky, a miracle in itself, and dropped the bamboo skis as it gained altitude. The pilot flew north alone through 1,000 miles of Japanese-controlled airspace toward Taiwan, then called Formosa, a major Japanese military base. What happened over Taiwan remains unclear, but Japanese records from December 8, 1942, confirm that an American P-40 appeared over Formosa and conducted what appeared to be a bombing or strafing run before fleeing toward China. Japanese fighters scrambled to intercept. The P-40 engaged in combat. It was badly damaged, shot full of holes, parts of the wing blown off, the canopy shattered. The pilot was wounded, probably mortally, but somehow, impossibly, he stayed airborne and kept flying. He crossed hundreds of miles of ocean. He evaded Japanese fighters. He navigated without proper instruments, probably using dead reckoning and sheer determination. And on the afternoon of December 8, 1942, Flying Tigers pilots Robert Lee Scott and Johnny Hampshire spotted him approaching the Chinese coast. Robert Lee Scott was no ordinary pilot. He was a genuine American hero, one of the legendary Flying Tigers who had been defending China against Japanese aggression. His book, God is My Co-Pilot, would become a bestseller and later a movie. When Scott and Hampshire first spotted the mysterious P-40, they were suspicious. The Japanese had captured American aircraft before and used them in deception operations. The plane's outdated markings, insignia not used since Pearl Harbor, made them wary. Scott tried to radio the plane. No response. The radio was likely destroyed. Scott fired a warning burst across the plane's nose. The P-40 didn't react. It just kept flying in a straight line toward China, as if on autopilot. Concerned, Scott and Hampshire flew closer to inspect the aircraft. What they saw was horrifying. The P-40 was a flying wreck. Bullet holes covered the fuselage. One aileron was completely gone. Part of the wing was missing, just gone, torn away. Crude field repairs covered sections of the plane, mismatched metal patches and paint that clearly came from other aircraft. Most impossibly, the plane had no landing gear. The wheel wells were empty. There was no way this plane could have taken off from any airfield, yet here it was, hundreds of miles from the nearest American base, still flying. As Scott pulled alongside the canopy to look at the pilot, he saw the man was slumped forward, unconscious or dead. Blood covered his flight suit. His face was pale. Then, as Scott watched, the pilot stirred. He slowly raised his head. He looked at Scott through the shattered canopy, and he smiled, a weak, sad smile, and raised his hand in a final wave. Scott realized the pilot knew he was dying. He knew he'd never land. He was just trying to get as close to friendly territory as possible before the end. Moments later, the ghost P-40 began losing altitude. It disappeared into the clouds. Scott and Hampshire followed it down and watched it crash into a rice paddy in Fujian province. Ground troops rushed to the crash site. They expected to find the pilot's body, identify him, and figure out where this impossible plane had come from. But what they found was stranger than anyone expected. The wreckage confirmed everything Scott had seen. A P-40 riddled with battle damage, makeshift repairs, and no landing gear. The plane had flown on willpower alone. The pilot's body was found, but accounts differ on what happened to it. Some versions say the body was too badly damaged to identify. Others say it was removed and buried locally. Military records from the chaotic China theater in 1942 are incomplete, and the identity of the pilot was apparently never confirmed. Searchers did find personal effects, a diary or logbook, letters, some documentation. These were handed over to military superiors for analysis, and then they disappeared, lost in the vast bureaucracy of the war effort as one account put it. The documents that might have explained everything, who the pilot was, where he came from, what his mission had been, vanished into the chaos of wartime record keeping and were never seen again. Without definitive identification, the story became legend. Officially, it was just another unexplained incident in a war full of them. The military had bigger problems than solving the mystery of one unidentified pilot. But the men who saw it, Scott, Hampshire, the ground troops who reached the crash site, never forgot. After the war, Robert Lee Scott published God is My Co-Pilot in 1943, which became a massive bestseller. The book recounted his experiences flying with the Flying Tigers in China. In the book, Scott included the story of the Ghost P-40. He described the encounter in detail, the mysterious aircraft with outdated markings, the dying pilot's wave, the crash in the rice paddy. But he admitted he didn't know the full story. Japanese records confirmed that there was an American P-40 over Formosa on Deck Center 8, 1942, Scott wrote, but where it came from, where it was headed, and indeed how it even got airborne, remain a mystery. Scott speculated about Mindanao. He'd heard rumors of American holdouts on the island, mechanics and pilots who had refused to surrender. He theorized they might have rebuilt a P-40 from scavenged parts and launched a suicide mission, but it was just a theory. Scott had no proof. Over the years, other accounts emerged. Some named the pilot as Corn Sherrill, though Scott himself noted that this was a fictitious name used to protect the real pilot's identity or because the identity was unknown. Other versions placed the encounter in different months, September 1942, April 1942, or even different locations. As with many wartime legends, the details became muddled as the story was retold. In some retellings, the Ghost P-40 wasn't approaching China, but approaching the American mainland, California, or even Pearl Harbor itself, flying thousands of miles across the Pacific, which would have been physically impossible for a P-40's range, even with extra fuel tanks. These variations are almost certainly embellishments or confusion with other incidents, but they show how the story captured imaginations. So what's the truth? Did the Ghost P-40 really exist? The answer appears to be yes. Something very much like this happened, though the exact details remain disputed. What we know for certain, Japanese records confirm an American P-40 was spotted over Taiwan, Formosa, on December 8, 1942. This is documented in captured Japanese military records. Robert Lee Scott was a real person and a credible witness. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist or storyteller. He was a decorated combat pilot whose other accounts from the war have been verified. American forces were stranded on Mindanao in 1942. This is historical fact. Small groups of soldiers, pilots, and mechanics did escape there after Bataan and Corregidor fell. The encounter happened in China on December 8, 1942. Multiple accounts from different sources confirm Flying Tigers pilots encountered a mysterious P-40 on that date. What remains uncertain? The pilot's identity. Despite decades of research, no one has definitively identified who flew the Ghost P-40. Corn Sherrill was almost certainly a pseudonym or fictional name. Whether it really came from Mindanao. The 1,000-plus mile flight from Mindanao to Taiwan to China would have been at the extreme edge of a P-40's range, even with extra fuel. Some historians question whether the plane could have made it, how it took off without landing gear. The bamboo skis story is dramatic but mechanically questionable. Could they really support a 3-ton aircraft during takeoff? Maybe, but it seems unlikely. What happened to the pilot's body and documentation? The military bureaucracy explanation is plausible. Records were lost constantly during the war, but it's frustrating that nothing survived. Alternative theories. Some researchers suggest the Ghost P-40 might have come from a different location, perhaps a captured Japanese airfield or an emergency landing strip closer to Taiwan that American forces had secretly established. Others propose the plane was salvaged from an earlier crash site in China itself, rebuilt by guerrillas or missionaries and flown on a one-way attack mission. The most skeptical interpretation suggests the entire Mindanao reconstruction story was fiction added later, and the truth was simply that an American pilot who had been shot down over Taiwan months earlier somehow survived, rebuilt his damaged plane with Japanese materials, and flew it to China before dying of his wounds. True or embellished, the Ghost P-40 story has endured for over 80 years because it represents something profound about the American experience in the Pacific War. It's a story about refusing to surrender, about men trapped behind enemy lines who wouldn't give up, who kept fighting with whatever they had. It's about impossible heroism. A pilot flying a shot-up plane with no landing gear over 1,000 miles of enemy territory, knowing he'd never survive just to strike one more blow against the enemy. It's about sacrifice. The dying pilot waving to his fellow Americans before crashing, a final gesture of camaraderie and brotherhood. And it's about mysteries that won't be solved. The lost identity, the missing records, the questions that remain unanswered, even 80 years later. The Ghost P-40 has appeared in books, articles, documentaries, and online forums. Aviation enthusiasts debate its authenticity. Historians search for the missing documentation. Relatives of pilots lost in the Philippines wonder if their loved ones might have been the ghost pilot. In a way, the mystery itself has become more important than the truth. The Ghost P-40 is a symbol, a reminder that in war, especially in the chaotic Pacific theater, countless acts of courage and desperation occurred that were never properly documented, never officially recognized, never fully explained. So who was the Ghost P-40 pilot? Where did he really come from? How did he manage that impossible flight? We may never know with certainty. The documentation is lost. The witnesses are gone. The crash site in rural China has long since been reclaimed by rice paddies in time. What we do know is this. On December 8, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor, a badly damaged P-40 Warhawk with outdated American markings appeared over Japanese-occupied Taiwan, conducted an attack, fought its way to China, and crashed with a dead or dying pilot at the controls. Whether he came from Mindanao after 7 months of preparation or from some other forgotten corner of the war, he was an American who refused to quit. He kept fighting long after anyone could have expected him to surrender, and when he knew he was dying, he flew as far as he could toward friendly territory, waved to fellow pilots, and crashed on the side of freedom. That pilot's name may be lost to history, but his courage isn't. The Ghost P-40 reminds us that in World War II, countless acts of heroism went unrecorded. Countless men and women performed extraordinary feats that were lost in the chaos of war. The stories we know are just a fraction of what really happened. Somewhere in the mountains of Mindanao, or in the jungles of Taiwan, or in the archives of a forgotten military warehouse, the truth about the Ghost P-40 might still be waiting to be discovered. Until then, it remains what it has always been, one of World War II's most haunting mysteries, and a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who fought. Thank you for watching. If you found this deep dive into the Ghost P-40 mystery fascinating, please subscribe for more World War II mysteries. And let me know in the comments, do you think the Mindanao story is true, or is there another explanation? Until next time, remember, some heroes fly so far into legend that we can never quite catch up to them.